The air felt thick with tension as Sarah stood in the doorway, her eyes frozen on the letter in her hands. It was a letter she had never expected to find, a letter that held the truth she'd been running from. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing as she read the words over and over. The silence around her was suffocating, the weight of the discovery heavy in her chest. It was impossible, yet it was right in front of her. The life she had built, the love she had trusted, all of it was a lie. The revelation shattered everything she had ever known. Her heart ached as she tried to process the betrayal. The room spun, her hands trembling as she slowly dropped the letter to the floor. This was the moment she could no longer deny the truth. And it was over. Sarah sat on the edge of the sofa, the letter now crumpled in her hands. Her mind kept racing, unable to process what she had just discovered. How could it be true? How could the person she trusted the most betray her so completely? She stared at the floor, her thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion. The silence of the room seemed to amplify the storm inside her, each second feeling heavier than the last. It felt like the world was closing in on her, and yet, the weight of the truth crushed her even more. She tried to steady her breath, but it caught in her chest, like a sob she couldn't release. The realization was undeniable, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. She had been living in a lie all this time, and now, there was no turning back. The air felt heavy as Sarah walked over to the window, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky outside. The world beyond her felt so distant, so far removed from the pain she was enduring inside. She felt like she was suffocating, each breath a struggle. The weight of the truth clung to her, more suffocating than any physical burden. Her mind kept replaying moments from her life, each one now tainted by the realization of betrayal. How had she missed the signs? How had she been so blind to it all? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers. Just more pain, more confusion. As the sky grew darker, so did the room, and Sarah was left alone with her thoughts. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know how to move on from this. In a daze, Sarah walked through the house, her mind unable to focus on anything. Her body moved on autopilot, yet her thoughts were miles away, lost in the shock of it all. She stumbled into the kitchen, her hands reaching for a glass of water, but it felt like the simplest of actions was beyond her. Every step felt like a burden, every movement slow and deliberate. She knew she had to make sense of it, but where to begin? Her heart ached as she thought of the person who had once meant everything to her. Could she ever trust again? Could she ever rebuild what had been shattered? These questions echoed in her mind, each one more painful than the last. With a shaky breath, she placed the glass back down and rested her forehead against the cool counter, trying to steady herself. Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her back to the present. It was a message from Jack, the person who had once been her anchor. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she could bear to read it, knowing that each word would only deepen the wound. But her fingers hovered over the screen, unable to resist the pull of it. The message flashed on the screen. "We need to talk." Her breath caught in her throat. It was too much. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that everything had been a facade. She couldn't do this. Not now. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over as she sank down onto the kitchen floor, the weight of it all too much to bear. Sarah sat by the window, her body curled into itself as she stared out into the darkness of the night. Her thoughts were a mess, each one more painful than the last. The storm that had raged inside her for days now felt like a constant hum in her ears. Every step she took towards healing felt like an impossible mountain to climb. She thought of the people she had trusted, the person she had once loved, and the cold truth that had shattered everything. There was no escaping it. She had to face it, but every time she tried to move forward, she was pulled back into the past. The grief was suffocating, and the silence was deafening. She wished for a moment of peace, for a way to heal, but the answers didn't come. All she had now were questions. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but the weight of it all was too much to bear. The phone in Sarah's hand buzzed again. Another message from Jack. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding it, but the thought of facing him, of hearing the words that would surely come, filled her with dread. She hesitated, staring at the screen for a long moment, as if waiting for the courage to open it. Deep down, she feared the answer it might bring. What if it confirmed every nightmare she had? What if he didn't regret a single thing? But then, she thought of all the memories, the way he had once looked at her, the warmth of his smile. Could it all have been a lie? She was scared to find out, but more than anything, she needed answers. With a shaky hand, she tapped the screen, each second of delay feeling like a lifetime. The words on the screen hit her like a tidal wave. "I never meant to hurt you." It was Jack. She could hardly believe it. She had expected something, some form of acknowledgement, but this? It was just a vague attempt at closure. She felt her stomach churn as she read and reread the message, each word sinking her deeper into despair. He never meant to hurt her? The words seemed hollow, like they were nothing but an empty apology wrapped in empty promises. She felt betrayed all over again, as if this message was just another way for him to absolve himself, to shift the blame. He hadn't really understood the damage he'd done. The pain was still raw, too fresh to be dismissed with a few words on a screen. She tossed the phone onto the bed, the words echoing in her mind. How could he think this would fix anything? The next morning, Sarah went through the motions. She had learned how to do that, how to appear fine even when the storm inside was relentless. She forced herself to get dressed to make her coffee, but every action felt mechanical, like she was on autopilot. She couldn't escape the constant thoughts racing through her mind, the overwhelming guilt, and the fear of facing what came next. It was like she was holding her breath, waiting for the world to collapse around her again. But she wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to face the truth, to accept the reality that she might never truly heal. She stared out of the window at the quiet morning, wishing for peace but finding none. The silence only amplified the ache inside. She wasn't sure how to go on from here, but she had no choice but to keep moving. Later that evening, Sarah found herself sitting in the park, a place she often went when she needed to clear her head. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, but Sarah felt disconnected from it all. The world around her seemed to continue as usual, but inside, everything had stopped. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children, but it didn't bring her peace. All she could think of was Jack, the betrayal, the endless questions with no answers. Was it possible to move on? Was it possible to ever trust again? The weight of those thoughts was unbearable, but she couldn't let go. She didn't know how. And so she sat in the stillness of the park, lost in her own thoughts, hoping for some sort of sign that things would get better. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, the tension between her and Jack palpable. His eyes, filled with regret, met hers, but they only deepened the ache in her chest. She didn't want to hear his explanations anymore. She didn't want to know why. The lies, the deceit, everything he had done, all of it came crashing down on her in that single moment. "I never wanted to hurt you," Jack said again, his voice shaking. But Sarah couldn't believe him anymore. The hurt was too raw, the betrayal too deep. Every word he spoke seemed like an attempt to absolve himself, but it wasn't working. She felt like a stranger in her own life, standing across from the person she once loved, but could no longer trust. "It doesn't matter anymore," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I need to let go." The words were a release, but they also felt like a prison. Sarah's mind raced, and her heart felt like it was about to burst. She turned away from Jack, walking across the room with quick, unsteady steps. The anger bubbled inside her, mixing with the pain, and she couldn't hold it back anymore. "You never once considered what this would do to me," she said, her voice louder now. The tears threatened to spill again, but she fought them back. It was so much easier to be angry than to feel the crushing weight of sadness that followed. Jack tried to speak again, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "I don't want to hear it," she snapped. "It's over." The words felt final, but inside, There was a storm of emotions she couldn't quite control. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet, there was no turning back now. After a long silence, Jack finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to find out this way, Sarah." His words cut through the room like a blade. Sarah froze, her breath catching. She didn't want to feel anything for him anymore, but the vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache in a way she couldn't ignore. He had been the one person she trusted, the one person who had promised her forever. And now, forever was a lie. "I didn't want this to happen," Jack continued, his voice full of regret. "But I can't take it back." Sarah turned slowly to face him, her eyes narrowing with a mix of disbelief and anger. She had heard enough. She had heard all the empty words she could stand. The past few weeks had been torture, but now, this final confrontation had pushed her to the edge. Sarah's chest tightened as she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Everything she thought she knew about love and trust had been stripped away, piece by piece. She had tried so hard to hold it all together, to make sense of the chaos inside her, but it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. Jack stepped forward, his face pleading. "Sarah, please. I'm sorry. I can fix this." But Sarah shook her head slowly, her lips trembling. "No, Jack. You can't fix this. You've already broken it beyond repair." The words tasted bitter, but they were the truth. There was no going back to what they once had. The man she had loved so deeply was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. And the truth was, she wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him. "I can't keep doing this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The weight of the words hung in the air, as if the room itself held its breath. Jack's expression faltered, his face contorted with pain. He opened his mouth to say something, but Sarah cut him off. "No more lies. No more empty apologies. I need to let go." She turned her back on him, her footsteps slow and deliberate as she walked toward the door. Each step felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders, but the ache in her chest remained. She wasn't ready to forgive him, and maybe she never would be. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Jack standing in the silence. The truth had been spoken, and there was no turning back. She had made her choice. Sarah sat on the park bench, the evening air cool against her skin, as she tried to make sense of the decision she had made. It wasn't just Jack, it was everything she had let herself believe, everything she had chosen to ignore. The betrayal ran deeper than just him. It was in the choices she had made, in the trust she had given so freely, and in the way she had let her own pain be dismissed for so long. Her heart still ached, but there was something new, a realization that she was still in control of her life. She didn't have to carry the weight of his mistakes any longer. As she looked around, the world felt so different, yet strangely familiar. She had to accept what had happened, but she also had to move forward. The hardest part was facing the truth, and in that moment, Sarah realized that her journey wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about reclaiming her own strength. The phone call came just as Sarah was about to leave the park. It was her mentor, the one person who had always been there to offer wisdom when Sarah felt lost. "I know you're struggling," the mentor said, "but sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free." The words hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. She hadn't been ready to face the truth, but deep down, she knew it was what she needed. "The only way forward," the mentor continued, "is to stop hiding from the pain. Embrace it, learn from it, and let it shape who you're becoming." The phone went silent, and for a moment, Sarah felt a strange peace wash over her. She had always feared the unknown, but now it felt like the beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. She wasn't broken. She was becoming stronger. When Sarah walked into the coffee shop later that afternoon, her heart was still pounding from the phone call, but there was a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. As she sat at a corner table, she realized that the betrayal hadn't just been about Jack, it had been about her own inability to see the signs, to trust herself. She had ignored her instincts, hoping that love would be enough to fix everything. But love wasn't the cure for self-doubt. She was learning now that it was about balance, trusting others without losing herself in the process. As the barista brought her coffee, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The decisions she had made weren't easy, but they had been necessary. There was still so much work to do, but for the first time she felt like she was on the right path. As the days passed, Sarah found herself grappling with the weight of her decision. Her thoughts kept returning to Jack, to the person she once trusted with everything. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She could never go back. The love they had shared was real, but it had been built on a foundation of lies. And now, she had to let go of that illusion. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about accepting that people change, that circumstances change, and sometimes, we have to grow apart. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it began to shift, to transform into something that wasn't as heavy. Sarah knew now that she wasn't just surviving, she was starting to thrive. The world ahead of her was full of uncertainty, but she no longer feared it. She was ready to embrace it. Sarah's phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Jack. It was a message from a friend, a reminder to meet up for dinner, a simple invitation, but one that felt like the universe reaching out. She hesitated for a moment, but then she smiled softly. She had spent so much time running from the pain that she had forgotten how to live in the moment. But now, she was learning to take each step one at a time, to embrace the opportunities that came her way, even if they didn't come with all the answers. She had learned to trust herself again. As she stood up, ready to step out into the world, Sarah realized that she wasn't alone. She had herself, and that was enough for now. The moment Sarah had been dreading finally arrived. Jack stood at her doorstep, his expression filled with both desperation and guilt. "I need to talk to you, Sarah," he said, his voice pleading. For a brief moment she almost relented, the soft look in his eyes bringing back memories of what they once shared. But then her resolve came rushing back. The pain had been too deep, and the betrayal too great. "I don't want to hear it," Sarah replied, her voice steady but cold. "What we had is over." The words felt like both a release and a weight, and as the door creaked open, she saw the hurt in Jack's face. It wasn't the same anymore, and no apology would ever fix what had been broken. She wasn't the same person who had trusted him. She had grown stronger. The closure she needed was finally within her grasp. Sarah closed the door, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she leaned against the door for support. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but something had shifted. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was drowning in the emotional chaos. The tension was no longer between her and Jack, it was within herself. She had spent so long trying to fix the pieces of a relationship that had already fallen apart, but now she realized that her healing came from within. She wasn't waiting for someone else to fix her. She was taking the steps herself. The silence of the apartment was overwhelming, but it was also the beginning of something new. It wasn't just about the end of her relationship with Jack, it was about the rebirth of her own identity. As Sarah walked through the city streets the following day, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had been avoiding the world outside for so long, but now, she was ready to face it. The city was alive with energy. The hustle and bustle, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness she had been living in for months. With every step, she felt herself shedding the remnants of the past, each footfall a symbolic movement toward the future. She wasn't running anymore. She was living. The pain of Jack's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of acceptance, of peace. She was walking forward, not in the shadow of what was lost, but in the light of what she had gained. Later that evening, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her apartment. She had spent so much time focusing on the past that she had forgotten what it felt like to be fully present in the now. But now she could see herself with clarity. Her reflection was no longer just a reminder of what she had lost. It was a testament to what she had gained. She wasn't perfect, but she was whole. The bruises from her past were still there, but they didn't define her. She had learned to accept herself, flaws and all, and that acceptance was the foundation of her healing. Sarah smiled at her reflection, a soft, genuine smile that filled her heart with warmth. She wasn't waiting for someone else to save her anymore. She had saved herself. As Sarah stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking out over the city, she felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain, for the lessons learned, and for the strength she had found within herself. It had been a long and difficult journey, but it had brought her to this moment of peace. Jack was no longer a part of her future, and for the first time in a long while, she was okay with that. She was free to write her own story, to embrace whatever came next without fear. As the sun set behind her, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze against her face. The world felt full of possibility, and she was ready to step into it, knowing that no matter what happened, she was enough. Days passed, and Sarah felt herself slowly finding peace in the spaces where she once felt lost. She had stopped running from the pain and started embracing it, allowing herself to heal in ways she never thought possible. Her mornings were no longer filled with dread, but with a quiet sense of anticipation. Each day she took a step forward, even if it was small. She no longer needed Jack to validate her existence. She didn't need anyone to fix her. She was whole on her own. As she walked down the familiar streets of her neighborhood, Sarah realized that the world felt different now. The sunlight was brighter, the air clearer, and the sounds of life no longer felt like a constant reminder of what she had lost. She had found something even more precious, herself, and that was enough. One evening, Sarah sat with her confidant, Emily, at a cozy cafe. The weight of the past few months had softened, and though the scars still remained, Sarah felt a profound sense of healing. Emily, her closest friend, had been there through every dark moment. "You've come so far, Sarah," Emily said, her voice full of admiration. Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's been a journey," she replied, her voice steady. "But I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about finding peace with the past." Emily nodded, her hand resting on Sarah's, a gesture of deep understanding. In that moment, Sarah realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She had the support she needed, and more importantly, she had herself. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a new sense of clarity. The apartment that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. She spent the morning cleaning and reorganizing, a simple act of reclaiming her space and her life. As she sorted through old boxes of memories, she came across a letter she had written to Jack months ago, filled with raw emotion and unresolved thoughts. She hadn't sent it, and as she read it now, Sarah realized that the words weren't for him, they were for her. She had already said everything she needed to say, and now it was time to let go. She placed the letter in the recycling bin, watching as the paper fluttered down. It was a small act, but it symbolized the final release of the past. She was ready to move forward. Later that week, Sarah met with her mentor, the person who had guided her through the darkest moments. As they sat in the quiet park, Sarah shared how far she had come. "I can't believe I was ever that person," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I thought I'd never get through it." Her mentor smiled warmly. "The fact that you're here, able to say that, is proof of your strength." Sarah looked around, taking in the peaceful park, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. "I'm not the same person I was," Sarah continued, "but I'm starting to like who I am becoming." Her mentor nodded, pride in their eyes. "You're not just healing, Sarah. You're becoming the person you were always meant to be." Sarah felt the weight of those words settle into her heart. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. As Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment later that evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, she felt a sense of completion. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, stronger than ever. The past was no longer a burden. It was a part of her journey, a chapter that had shaped her into the woman she was becoming. She wasn't perfect, but she was whole, and that was enough. As the cool night air brushed against her skin, Sarah closed her eyes, taking in the moment. She was finally at peace with herself, with her past, and with what lay ahead. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to embrace whatever came next. The days had blurred together, but now Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a new chapter. The heavy burden of the past was no longer an anchor. It was a part of the journey. As she gazed out over the city, her reflection was clearer than ever before. She had built herself back up, piece by piece, with her own hands. Her eyes, once filled with uncertainty and pain, now shone with a quiet strength. The memories of Jack and all the hurt still lingered in the back of her mind, but they no longer controlled her. She wasn't defined by the past anymore. "It's time," she whispered to herself. Time to let go, time to embrace what lay ahead. The world was wide open, and Sarah was ready to explore it on her own terms. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Later that evening, Sarah met with Emily at their favorite cafe, the one where they had spent so many hours talking through the darkest days. "I never thought I'd be here like this," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. Emily smiled warmly, her hand resting gently on Sarah's. "You've come a long way. You've always had the strength inside you. You just had to remember how to find it." Sarah nodded, her eyes soft but focused. "It's still hard," she admitted, "but I know now that it's okay to not have all the answers. I'm not rushing anymore. I'm just living." Emily's smile widened. "And you'll keep living, one step at a time." Sarah's heart felt light, knowing that no matter what came next, she would face it with the people who truly cared for her, starting with herself. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her mirror once again, but this time it was different. The reflection staring back at her wasn't someone in pain or someone who had been broken. It was someone who had found the strength to rebuild and renew. She ran her fingers through her hair, smiling at her reflection. "I did it," she whispered. "I made it through." The path ahead was still uncertain, and she didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time she felt hopeful. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer held the power to dictate her future. It was her turn to define who she was becoming, and she was ready to take that first step into the unknown with her heart wide open. Sarah walked down the busy street, her pace steady and assured. The city was alive with activity, but Sarah no longer felt lost in the chaos. She felt like a part of it, like she was no longer on the outside looking in. The fear she once felt about her future had dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence. As she passed familiar places, she saw them differently now, no longer as reminders of the past, but as markers of her growth. The world wasn't as scary as it once seemed. She had learned to trust herself again, and with that trust came a new sense of possibility. She didn't need a grand plan, she just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time, toward whatever came next. That evening, Sarah stood at the edge of the lake, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze against her skin. Everything she had gone through, every moment of pain and doubt, had led her to this moment of peace. She had healed, but more than that, she had found a new strength, one that came from within. She wasn't the same person she once was, and for that she was grateful. As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm ready. Ready to face the future, ready to embrace the life that awaited her, with no fear and no regret." She was whole, and that was enough.